Welcome to the next video class. Today we're going to kind of be discussing a few seemingly random, not super closely related topics. We're going to talk a little bit about glass material. We're going to talk about transparency in materials, and we're just kind of going to look at how those go together and explore them a little bit in the node editor. And then we'll see how much time we have left after that. So this is the globe file that I created in the last tutorial. If I go to a material shaded viewport, you'll see that our globe texture is intact. If we look at it rendered, you can see that our lighting, our three-point lighting, basic three-point lighting setup is still in place. At the very end of the last tutorial, I deleted the ground plane in order to show how to render an alpha channel. So let's start off by putting that back. That can be a really helpful reference as far as how lighting is working, how a lot of different aspects of our shaders are working. So that can help a lot. Let's just go ahead and create a plane here. And we'll do the exact same thing to this plane that we did in the last tutorial to get us right back to where we were. We'll scale this by a factor of 50, and then we'll grab it in the z-axis with a value of -1 to put it directly underneath the globe. And there is our rendered viewport. Alright, so let's start off a little. I'm going to split out my window again here. Give ourselves a little more room over here, but let's start out by talking about a glass material, because we're going to use some glass to kind of make this globe look like sort of a neat man-made object. But let's start a little more basic than that. Let's start with just a plain glass material. So rather than manipulate this globe, I'm going to create a new object here to kind of give us an idea of what's going on with our material. Matter of fact, I might create two of them. So I'm going to go over in my create panel here, and I'm going to create another UV sphere. And of course, since our globe is still right on the origin, right on the 3D cursor actually in Blender, that second sphere is now literally in the middle of the globe. So let's go to a top view and just kind of move that out just a little bit, so we can see over here that we've got this second sphere sitting next to our globe. I'm going to smooth shade that sphere, but otherwise I'm basically going to leave it alone. So we're going to use this sphere as a test object for glass. And you know what, actually let's look at our objects over here. Since we're starting to get a few objects, let's make sure things have names that make sense. So my globe is currently just called sphere. Let's call it globe so we can find it easier in the outliner. And then sphere.001 will actually work for this, since it's not really going to be anything more specific than just a sphere. So next object I'm going to create, let's create a cylinder. And cap fill type I'm going to change to, you know what, let's just leave it alone. Let's leave it at n-gon for now. You can see this here. I'm going to scale this in every axis except for Z, just to kind of narrow it down a little bit. And let's move this kind of back behind our globe. And then let's edit this object a little bit. I'm going to make this into like a water glass or something. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. Go to face select, and currently the top of this is just an n-gon, so I'm going to delete that face. Normally I would advise you not to model with n-gons, but in this case we're basically just testing materials, so in order to save time I'm going to break my rule and do it. So I just tapped A to select all, and I'm going to extrude and scale everything down and move it in the z-axis, Basically what we've done there is we've made a really simple kind of cup. And we'll apply a glass material to that as well. It's currently flat shaded, so let's smooth shade that object. And just because glass is going to behave kind of, well, we'll get there actually. The way we've put this together is going to act really strangely with a glass material, so I'll show you what that looks like and then we'll talk about how to fix it rather than just fixing it up front. Alright, so we've got our objects here and it is time for us to build a glass material. So I'm going to change this viewport over here. We'll leave our rendered view. We'll change this into a node editor. And currently this object is selected. It's called cylinder. Let's call it cup instead of cylinder, just so we have a little easier time finding it. Our cup object currently has no material associated with it. So I'm going to, down here in the node editor, click new to start a new material. We'll give it a name. We'll call this glass, and let's say green. I'll make some green tinted glass here. Now glass behaves a little bit differently than a normal material. It's transparent, it's also reflective, it also refracts light. So in order to make a realistic kind of believable glass, we actually do not need a diffuse shader. We can totally get rid of that, so I'm going to select it and delete it. Then I'm going to start adding some shaders down here. So let's add a refraction shader. And let's add a glossy shader to give us some reflectance. And obviously these both need to end up going into the surface here, so we need to add a mix shader to mix them. And let's put these together and watch our object over there and kind of see what it starts to look like. So you can see that its appearance has changed. It's not really looking like glass yet. It kind of looks like cheap plastic trying to look like metal, and that's definitely not the look that we want. First of all, I need to take the roughness down. That will help a little bit. Now we're getting some real reflection here, some sharp reflections and sharp highlights. That helps a little. You can see if we come around behind here that you can kind of see through the glass in a weird sort of way, but it's acting really strange. And one of the reasons for that is that glass, you can't divide its refraction and its refractiveness and its reflectiveness. You can't divide those just straight numerically and say, well, yeah, it's about a 50-50 split of what it does. Especially on a curved surface like this, for instance. What is actually happening, or what should actually be happening here, is something called the Fresnel effect. And basically that means that as the surface angles away from us, as we're directly facing the surface, it's going to behave differently in terms of reflection, refraction, what have you. It's going to behave differently than if the surface, say around the sides, is not directly facing toward us. So that's called the Fresnel effect, and Blender actually has a handy little model just for modeling that. So if we go down here to add, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm going to have to try to remember where it's located. I think it's under input. There it is. You see this Fresnel. I can click on that, and as an FYI, the IOR stands for Index of Refraction. And you can see that it is set to 1.45 on both of these. That is roughly the index of refraction of glass. So that's right where we need it. We can take the factor of this and basically tell the mix shader to mix according to a Fresnel effect, and that gives us much more realistic glass. Okay, you can see we're reflecting on the sides, but when it comes to looking straight through it, we can see through the actual object. Now it's still behaving a little bit strangely. Let's let the rendered viewport kind of have a chance to calm down here. You can see a lot of vertical banding here, and it's actually not as pronounced as I would have expected, but look down here at the edges. You see all these jagged kind of shiny spots. That is because those are a result of the geometry that is being used to describe this cup. For instance, watch these lines. If I tab into edit mode, you can see that those jaggies basically correspond to vertical lines describing the cup. So what I need to do here is actually apply a modifier to the cup, a subdivision surface modifier, and that will smooth it way out. It's also kind of ruined it a little bit because the bottom's now curved. So I have to add a little bit more geometry here to describe what I want this cup to actually look like. So let's turn on the edit cage adjustment for this so we can see what's kind of actually happening, and we'll just do a few loop, cut, and slide operations here. So Control R, and then we'll slide that loop all the way down to the bottom. That will allow the bottom to be flat. Control R again, we'll slide up to the top and kind of flatten out the top. Then we'll take care of the inside. Whoop. There we go. Slide down to the bottom. Control R again. And slide up to the top. Alright. Tab out of edit mode. Go back to a rendered viewport. And that looks a lot more like a real glass cup. And it's behaving more like a glass should. Okay, so I'm actually fairly happy with that glass, other than I think we could get more creative. For instance, we did call this green glass. So you see under our refraction value here, we can actually pick a color. So let's tell that to be kind of greenish. Probably not too terribly dark, just give it a tint. Well, that's kind of fun, and you can see that that color is also behaving according to the Fresnel effect. If we swap these, basically it makes the Fresnel effect work backwards to what is real. So we start getting our green toward the outside, and we start getting our opacity toward the outside, but of course light will be bending strangely there. So put that back, and we get this kind of look. Now our glossy color is still white, so if we want that to match up a little better, we can also kind of start to tint that a little bit green. And that's a pretty good looking color. So I'm fairly happy with that. I think that looks pretty convincingly like glass, and it's behaving the correct way. Let's go to our sphere now. So if I select this sphere and come over here to my materials, I don't really have to totally reinvent the wheel here. Let's say I want the sphere to be made of red glass. I can just select my green glass material, and then this little plus button here will make a copy of it. I can rename that and call it glass red. Of course, it's currently poorly named, but now that I'm dealing with my glass red material over here in the node editor, I can change this color around, and it will not mess with the colors of the green cup that I made. So let's kind of send these both toward the red end of the spectrum. I might keep the specular highlights white on this one. Okay, and you can see something cool is happening with our lighting here. We're actually getting kind of a bloom of light where these glasses they're not letting light penetrate uniformly. That's also acting according to the Fresnel effect. So that's pretty cool. That's kind of a neat thing that automatically happens when you have an unbiased renderer like Cycles. Okay, so basically we've kind of figured out how to make glass here. That's pretty easy. Your assignment number 4 talks about making a globe with transparent oceans. Okay, so there you can kind of trick yourself out thinking about how to do that. Like, let's say I want to make these oceans into a glass object, make it look like this is a glass sphere with the continents put on it in a non-glass material of some sort. So that would be kind of a neat looking object, but it might be a little difficult to make. But if you think through it right, if your thinking process is the right, or in the right order, then it's not too bad. So I'm going to select the globe here, and you can see that this is a really simple shader. Just got our image texture, got our diffuse texture, and basically those go straight into the surface node of the material output. So that's what we're looking at here, basically, is just an image, a JPEG image, forming the diffuse portion of a shader, and that's coloring the sphere there. It's the whole visual effect belongs to that JPEG, and how Blender is wrapping it around, which of course is accomplished through these texture coordinates and the projection method, which is spherical. Okay, if we want to get a little more creative with that, then we can start adding some nodes. For instance, I know I'm going to need a transparency node in addition to the diffuse shader, and those are going to have to mix. So let's add our mix shader here first of all, and then kind of work backwards. So there's my shader, and if I add, actually, you know what, we don't even really have to we don't have to reinvent the wheel here either. But first, before we start dealing with the transparent map, let's add a transparent shader. So we've got that here. We'll make it the second part of the mix. You can see at a 50-50 mix, basically all we've created here is a globe that is half translucent, half transparent. We need to give Blender better instructions about how to mix these shaders. So if I duplicate these two objects, texture coordinates and image texture, I can kind of save myself a little time here. So currently they're unconnected, they're just kind of their own little island, they're not affecting the look of anything over here. If I click open image here, and then I have, let's look at thumbnails here. I have this image here called earthspecmask.png, and this isn't actually what it's intended to do, but basically I can see that the continents, the land, are all white, and the oceans are all black. So that would actually work as a transparency map. Basically, a transparency map works a lot like a mask in Photoshop. White becomes opaque, black becomes transparent. So that image there would make a really good set of instructions for Blender to know how to mix the transparent shader with the diffuse shader that we have there. So let's double click on that. This is now loaded up with that information, and I can just take the color from there and change it to the mix factor for the mix shader. You can see that that had the exact opposite effect of what I needed. Okay, so the continents are now transparent and the oceans are opaque. Luckily for me, that's simple to fix. All we need to do is swap those in place, and that's pretty easy. So that's basically how you create a transparent shader there, and that it accomplishes technically the goal of the assignment, a globe with transparent oceans, but it's not very artful. It doesn't look very good. So what if, rather than transparency here, we decided to make a glass material? Okay, we've got a pretty simple split here. This is transparent, this is not. This guy up here is telling the two how to mix. So if I just swap out the transparent for a glass material, which I now know how to make, then that should be pretty straightforward to make basically the oceans become a glass material. That could be pretty cool. So I'm going to delete my transparent material. then I'm going to add the nodes that I need in order to make glass. So first of all, I know I need a refraction shader. I know I need a transparent. Nope, sorry, I'm thinking the wrong way here. I know I need a glossy shader for reflectance. Let's turn the roughness on that all the way down. And I know I need a mixer for the two. So mix shader, start plugging things in here. And I know that those mix instructions need to come from a Fresnel effect. So let's go up to, input. I always forget where things are. And Fresnel, index of refraction is still set to 1.45, both on the refraction and the Fresnel effect, and tell it to mix with that. Okay, so there we've constructed our glass material, and I can simply take this and plug it into the second half of my mix shader up here, and all of a sudden things start behaving pretty crazy over here. That's because we now have clear glass oceans that are refracting. So they're actually kind of magnifying what's on the other side. You can see there's a specular highlight here. That's pretty cool. Let's turn the oceans just a little bit blue, just to give ourselves kind of that blue ocean sort of look to our globe. And that's a pretty neat way to do it. So we've got, let's let that render for a second. You can see our light sources are reflecting in the globes and in the cup and everything, and we've got these really cool looking objects now simply by mixing a few materials that we already knew how to make. And we've got a couple of mix shaders here, but beyond that, it's not a terribly complex process to make these materials, to make them mix well. So that's kind of a cool thing. By way of demonstration, just to sort of reinforce what these transparency maps are doing, let's look at a little bit of a simpler example. So I'm going to save my work here. Let's call this globe1.blend. Okay, and then I'm going to start a new file here. I don't need the default cube for this one. I'm going to delete that and then change to a cycles render engine. And we'll just demonstrate really simply once again, just to make the concept clear, a transparency map and what it's doing. So I'm going to create just a simple plane. That's all I need. And let's split out our view here. I want to look at this in a rendered viewport. And let's select our lamp and increase its brightness somewhat. There we go. Okay, so we've got this plane, and I'm going to create a material for it. So let's go to the node editor here, select the plane. Currently doesn't have a material. We'll create a new one. I'm just going to call this leaf. That's what we're going to make. And I've just gone onto Google Images and grabbed a random leaf for this demonstration. So let's add an image texture. Connect the color of the image texture to the color of our diffuse. Click open, then go to my 3D personal folder, and there's leaf.jpg right there. Currently this still doesn't quite know how to map that leaf on there, so I can do this one of two ways. If I go to my color, you can see it's got a vector. It's currently set to default. I can just tell it to be generated. And that gives me a texture coordinate node over here. So I could create that in the node editor or over here one of two ways. So now we have this kind of, it almost looks like a piece of paper with a leaf printed on it. You know, that's great. It kind of looks neat. But we can make those parts that are not the leaf go away really easily. So let's, if I go down to Adobe Photoshop over here, you can see this image of a leaf. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to be pretty easy to cut out. I just sort of have to grab my what do they call that? I can't even remember. Tooltip, quick selection tool. And that selects basically everything that's not leaf for me. So let's, I'm going to create a new layer to make this a little bit easier. And I am going to dye all the outside black, and then select inverse, or Command-Shift-I for those of you who like keyboard shortcuts, dye the inside white. Deselect, and we will just kind of a quick and dirty image there. Save this as, we'll save it as a JPEG file. Let's call this leaf transparency map.jpg. Save it. Small, might as well save it all the highest quality we can. Go back to Blender, and now we basically just kind of need to do the same thing as we just did in the other one. We're going to add a mix shader because we know we need to mix this diffuse with a transparency shader. So let's add a transparency shader, transparent, add it to the mix, and so now we have a half transparent image here. So our mix factor needs to come from that set of instructions we just created in Photoshop. So once again, I'm just going to grab our image texture and our texture coordinate nodes and duplicate them. And on this image texture, I'm going to open our leaf transparency map. Connect the color from this node to the factor. You can see once again, it's done it backwards because I have these plugged in backwards. So now there is our leaf. So let's generate one more plane, move it underneath our leaf and scale it by a factor of 50, and you can see that this even casts a shadow that is appropriate for what we're doing here. Rotate in Y, X. The underside of the leaf is there, the top of the leaf. So that is a really good way to make a leaf or something like a feather or something like that that doesn't require a lot of polygons. Basically, we've just got one plane there. It's not subdivided at all, and we just used it to create a transparent leaf object. So that's basic transparency mapping. I hope that helps, and I'll see you in class.